Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Robert Wood Johnson Penn State CASEL-supported symposium today on the role of the states in supporting social-emotional learning, opportunities and challenges. I'm Mark Greenberg, and I'm happy to welcome you and open the day. In the past few years, there's been growing momentum in states to advance social-emotional learning. And this is likely due to a convergence of a variety of important concerns and events. Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA passage in late 2015 encouraged states to think more broadly about how to equip and how to assess students for life success in their futures. The long-building frustration over intensive testing and the sole focus on testing has caused a backlash among parents, teachers, and others regarding educating the whole child. And increased school violence inevitably, but slowly has led citizens to consider culture and climate of schools and the social-emotional life of students. During the past 3 years, Penn State, with the support of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, has published 10 important briefs. They're all on your stick today, as well as briefs on the state work. What we know about the science of SEL, what are the next steps to implement SEL effectively in our schools and our communities, from birth to high school graduation. These briefs are available today outside on paper as well as on your stick. And one more will be released in late November, authored by myself and Roger Weisberg, that overviews the entire series and provides a series of longer-term recommendations. As part of this series of briefs, we've held 2 previous policy-related meetings in this very room. In 2016 on the topic of teacher stress and systems change, in 2017 on cost-benefit analysis and the economics of social-emotional learning. Today is the third in the series and focuses on the critical role of states and state agencies in advancing frameworks and supporting work for advancing social-emotional learning as an essential and central part of every child's educational experience in the United States. We're very excited to host this meeting today, and I hope it is one more positive step in advancing the well-being of children and the adults who educate them. I'd now like to introduce Tracy Costigan, who's been the program officer for this work and is the learning officer of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to what's going to be an exciting day of conversation about social-emotional learning and how states are really leading the world. Leading the world, I like that. Leading the way to creating change in terms of implementation and best practices. So last night we hosted a dinner for many of the speakers that are here today, and it was just so interesting to hear about the different approaches happening in different states and the various challenges and opportunities that they're experiencing. And it was really clear that we have a room full of champions who really care about making a difference for our children, teachers, and schools. So over the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of leading this program for RWJF, and to work in close partnership with Karen Bierman and Mark Greenberg and Mel Miller, as well as their colleagues from Penn State. When we first made this grant, we really knew it was important to summarize and disseminate decades of research on social and emotional development and get it into a form that would resonate with audiences beyond academe. And I have to say that this project has been extraordinary. It really exceeded our expectations. The briefs are the breadth and depth of topics that Penn State put forth, the authors that they brought to help with these briefs have been really impressive, and we've seen greater interest and engagement with these from various audiences that really, that truly matter and can make a difference. So thank you for that, Mark, Karen, and team. So I want to take a moment to say that many of you know that Mark is beginning to retire from Penn State. And I want to take a moment to recognize, yes, to cheer him on and recognize his contribution, not just to this project, of course, but to the entire field. What he's done will have deep and lasting effects on social and emotional learning, on our children, families, teachers, schools, child development broadly. And Mark, it's been a dream to work with you. I feel so grateful to have had this experience over the last 3 years. We know that you're going to continue keeping your hand in the game for a while, and for that, we are all really fortunate. So can we just take a moment to recognize Mark? Thank you. And I also want to make sure to thank Linda Duesenberry of CASEL. Of course, we all know she leads the Collaborating States Initiative, and Linda really led the way for shaping this meeting, so thank you. Before I turn this over, I need to tell you two things. In case you haven't heard, we are recording this meeting. We are having live streaming right now for people who want to participate remotely. We're hoping to be able to produce some webinars or short pieces from this meeting. So know that we are recording, and we will have microphones when we get to the Q&A and discussion piece to make sure we capture everything happening in the audience. Also, since we've made this meeting more open with live streaming, we are encouraging social media with hashtag #SELState. So go tweet away. We'd love to, have some engagement in that way as well and carry on the conversation beyond this room. So now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jennifer Nandu. She directs all of the Foundation's child-focused strategy and grant making, and she's another true champion working to ensure that all children have equitable, just, and safe access to schools. Jen?
Good morning. So I'll just admit my own lapse in executive function. I had a different time on my agenda and got here right as we were starting remarks. So I do have self-awareness, though, and I'm working through the feelings about that. So today I'd like to start where the Penn State issue briefs began, because it is so relevant for today. So their first brief was on teacher stress. And I think a few weeks ago, many readers were stunned by the front page of the Time magazine, where it said, "I have a master's degree, 16 years of experience, 2 extra jobs, and donate plasma to pay the bills. I'm a teacher in America." The stories enclosed added texture to what teachers and, quite frankly, many educators in the United States are living. Another teacher said, "I have 20 years of experience, can't afford to fix my car, see a doctor for headaches, or save money for my own child's future." What was both hopeful and challenging was to see the reactions. Some people commented and expressed that they thought teachers were glorified babysitters. Others who understood that their whole lives were affected by the care and nurturing they received at school expressed wild praise and were appalled by what was going on. What was clear was that whatever you believed, that a teacher's context and educator's context is demanding, often under-resourced, and makes it hard to have schools be the learning and development opportunities that they need to be. And so I wanted to congratulate Penn State University, because the context that they first put in that 2016 brief on social and emotional learning crystallized a core element of what we say. Learning is social emotional, academics are social emotional, not just for a child, but within the entire school environment. So good morning. Again, I'm Jennifer Nandu, and I'm the interim managing director for the portfolio that focuses on how we can make sure that every child and their families have the opportunity for well-being, including a strong and stable start. A central strategy is ensuring that schools are healthy, that systems that we invest in as a nation provide a shared experience for children across this country, are ones where they can learn and make the most of their educational opportunities. We know that one of the fundamental means to making progress in our goal is to bolster the social and emotional well-being of children and their families. Turning back to that moment in 2016 also benchmarked several other key efforts. It had been a year since the Every Student Succeeds Act had passed, and people were embracing a broadened vision of education funding and concepts of the whole school, the whole community, whole child. The National Commission for Social, Emotional, and Academic Development was getting into full swing to support development of a playbook for how we build learning environments that boost children's development and their trajectory. The Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning launched their Collaborating States initiatives, had launched their Collaborating States initiative, and it was underway with a network that has rapidly built to just over 20 states to embed the principles of emotional learning at a systemic level throughout states. So needless to say, we have come a long way in a very short amount of time. That moment has been a part of an explosive trajectory where dozens more states, hundreds more districts, and thousands more schools are charging forward on efforts to create more safe, healthy, and nurturing school environments. And more leaders recognize that the importance of social and emotional development. We have seen states take steps to take so many efforts to embed social and emotional learning at this systemic level, whether through policy, through guidance, through broad practices. We all know this isn't about one program that a teacher implements or a kick-butt preschool program or a special class that a student goes to. To work well, the principles of social and emotional learning have to be embedded throughout learning environments, practices of the overall climate and culture. That often requires support and encouragement at the state level. The work that so many of you have been doing, sometimes undercover, sometimes with a different name, and sometimes in the very full light of sunshine, has been so important to this. The Collaborating States Initiative in particular is providing an important learning community and some intentional hands-on time for you to work together to develop and advance approaches that help take your state's efforts to a different level. So I'm hopeful that after today, we will all have learned more about what is actually working from the people who know it best, so that we can do better to support all students, what policies and practices are needed to best support social and emotional development across all the developmental stages and grade levels of a child's life, and most importantly, how do we ensure that these ideas are enacted into policies in ways that support social and emotional development for all children, for all young people, for all students, not just some. So I want to end where the last brief issued of the Penn State briefs has ended: health, equity, and social and emotional learning. At RWJF, we focus so much of our work, broadly speaking, on advancing health equity. That might seem like an idea that seems separate and distinct from the conversation we're having today, but it's not. To us, health equity means that everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be at their healthiest. To us, it is an imperative in everything we do and in everything we support. And so translating that idea into the context today, I would say we want to make sure that every student has a fair and just opportunity to go to a school that supports their whole self at their whole development. So let me be clear, what we don't mean is that we want to fix broken children, but ensure that each and every child is in a context and an environment where they can make the most of their learning. That's a core guidepost, in part because we know it is the right thing to do, but it's also because we know we're all better off if we advance a vision that understands we all do better when all of our children and families have the opportunity to thrive. If we keep these kinds of approaches front in mind, I'm confident that all states will see the value of fostering social and emotional development from where we start to where we end in a child's life and in school environments. With that, I want to welcome Linda Dusenberry, who is directing the Collaborating States Initiative, who's going to give the first keynote address of the morning. Thanks, Linda.
Good morning. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here. We are so grateful to Robert Wood Johnson and Penn State for this meeting, this opportunity for this meeting, and I'm going to go ahead and say it right away how grateful we are to Robert Wood Johnson and to Pure Edge for their support, their commitment to this work. It has been quite a couple of years since the CSI began, and we are very, very grateful. So I want to start by talking about our work with states at CASEL. And there's a question that we hear all the time, especially early on in our work with states, and it is, we all agree SEL is important, but what does it look like in practice? This is the question that we found in the beginning state teams were especially interested in trying to address in their work with their teams and their key stakeholders. And they were especially interested in how do you integrate it throughout the school day in academics so that it's happening all the time, because we can't ask teachers to do one more thing. The one more thing is a line we hear over and over. So I wanted to start out talking a little bit about where we started in our work with states with this question of what does SEL look like in practice when it's woven through the school day. And as a researcher with over 30 years studying evidence-based approaches, there are hundreds of classrooms that I could tell you about over the years where I have seen teachers seamlessly weave SEL with academics throughout the school day in urban settings, suburban settings, rural settings, elementary settings, middle school settings, high school settings. But I keep thinking about my daughter's third grade classroom every time I look at the cover of our Emerging Insights report. And so I decided rather than tell you as a researcher, I would tell you as a mom who happens to know a little bit about evidence-based approaches. How I saw her third grade teacher, Miss Kay, seamlessly weave SEL throughout her school day. This will take us to a rural classroom in North Carolina. But our family had just moved to North Carolina, and it was a tough year of transition for my daughter, Galen, in her new school. Many of you are familiar with the CASEL framework and how we organize educational approaches within SEL. You see that home and community, connecting to home and community is a major part of evidence-based approaches to SEL. And Ms. Kay was very intentional about how she connected with families. You'd often find parents and grandparents in the class reading with kids, always welcome to join for lunch. She would send home the cafeteria menu every week. And you could usually find me there on days the cafeteria served grilled cheese and vegetable soup. The school was ethnically and economically diverse. Half the kids were African American or Latino, half were white, half received free or reduced lunch. And I want to give you some examples of what she did in terms of connecting to self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and decision-making. I mentioned that this image reminds me always of her classroom. It was because she was always doing cooperative learning, small group activities like this, which teach relationship skills and then give kids a chance to practice them. In terms of relationship skills and self-management, she would, by the way, my daughter Galen would say that Miss K's classroom made her feel safe, that she ran a tight ship. As a researcher, I would say Galen was commenting on classroom climate. But in terms of self-management and relationship skill, Miss K would point to the classroom expectations, shared norms, rules that the class had developed together at the beginning of the year. Positive, simply stated things like listen well, share resources, respect each other at the beginning of every activity. Another example of an evidence-based practice. Other ways she supported self-management anytime the kids were frustrated or stressed before standardized testing. She would lead them through a little wellness dance, combining movement and breathing and focus their attention. As part of every activity, she would weave social and self-awareness. So for an activity like this one, she might say, as you're coloring the map, share with each other what you've learned about the states we've been studying this week, and tell each other which states you might like to visit or live in and why. And finally, for decision-making, I've seen teachers across the country teach kids a simple decision-making formula at the earlier grade levels, a more complex one with maybe more steps at the later developmental ages. But anytime kids face a decision, reminding them, or a choice, reminding them to use that formula. And so for an activity like this, she might say, decide together as a group what colors you want to use for the map. Maybe green for states with a lot of farms. So that's an example of how she wove SEL into academic practices. I want to end with one other evidence-based approach she used. She gave authentic feedback to kids. This is a note she sent home. My daughter had started the year timid and a little anxious at school. Ms. K sent this note home in April, so in the spring of the year, to recognize when she had observed Galen to stand up to a peer that she saw teasing another child. And so she says, I overheard you speaking kindly of a classmate today at lunch. You were supporting her and asking another girl about feelings. It takes a lot of courage and confidence to enter that positive conversation. I applaud your integrity. Love, Miss K. So this is an example of how she was always giving authentic feedback. So I want to tell you just quickly about the Collaborating States Initiative, but I want to make sure that you know that all through the day we are going to be talking about this, and I hope that you will ask lots of questions. I am thrilled that among the champions we have in the room today, we have state teams represented here today from about a dozen states. And so we are looking forward to all of you joining the conversation. These folks are rock stars, and I am so proud to be partnering with them at CASEL. So I look forward to bringing them into the conversation. The Collaborating States Initiative began just 2 years ago, but CASEL had been working with states for 15 years since we were part of the working group that helped to develop the Illinois standards, and we've got Ruth Cross in the room who co-chaired that group. But the Collaborating States Initiative is a community of practice made up of state teams. It was inspired by the Collaborating Districts Initiative, primarily or importantly for two reasons. One was we'd been hearing district teams say for years there were things that states could do to help them create foundational support for SEL. And the second thing was we had seen the power of a learning community as part of the CDI, and we wanted to see if that magic could transfer at the state level. And I can tell you it can. And in part, you see the growing interest across time in this graph. This graph is how many states the CSI connected to from the beginning in the fall of 2016 when we were funded by Robert Wood Johnson and Pure Edge to do this work. Initially, there were 8 states at our meeting. A couple of months later, we had doubled that number, and at our last meeting in February, we had 25 states 20 separate teams from 25 states. At our last national meeting, we also had the chiefs from many of those states. Each state, as part of the Collaborating States Initiative, is working in its own way to create statewide conditions that support equity-focused, evidence-based social and emotional learning. Each state develops a customized plan, but there are commonalities, and these priorities show you the early goals that many of the states articulated, one or more of these combination. Many of the states are articulating student competencies and standards. Many of the states in the room today can tell you about that and how they engaged in the process. Many are creating or have now created and shared guidance to support implementation. Many are strategically integrating SEL across their programs and priorities. And some are themselves developing professional learning to introduce the teams within their state, the district and school teams, to what is SEL, to get everyone on the same page about what it means. This just real quick. We did the math, Chi. You inspired us to think about how many students were we connecting to potentially in the CSI in terms of the states. It's actually 60% of the kids in the country are in these 25 states. So 30 million students, 1.8 million teachers, and so forth. Okay, so what do we know about the progress states are making? CASEL has been conducting a state scan since 2010 to look periodically at how many states have adopted learning standards, and more recently, how many are sharing guidance and other kinds of supports for implementation. This shows you the results of a brief that will be released, if not today, in the next day or so, about our most recent state scan. And I show it to you because I think it's an important thing that even suggests something about a predictor, an indicator of success. But this shows you for all 50 states, and we've also looked at the U.S. territories in our latest scan, so I can talk about that if you're interested. But this is all 50 states. All 50 states have preschool standards. They've articulated what students should know and be able to do at the preschool level for social and emotional learning. 25 states, they haven't gone beyond that yet. 11 states in the smaller wedges have begun to extend those learning goals up into early elementary. 14 states we found in our latest scan have now articulated competencies for social and emotional learning that extend to the 12th through high school. This shows you what's been happening over time. You see that starting around 2016, there is a rapid acceleration of the number of states articulating learning standards for SEL. Many of them just in the last couple of years, and I'll show you a similar trajectory of states that are extending into the preschool level in our last scan. Well, ESSA happened in 2015, and this is a really great example of how federal policy can give states encouragement to begin the work, but it also shows is interesting to us because we have 25 states connected to the CSI, 25 states not connected. When we look at that 50-50% split, what we find is that states that are connected to the CSI are 5 times more likely to have adopted learning standards or articulated goals for social and emotional learning, and 4 times more likely than states not connected. I'm not saying that's causation, but I do think that we can take some credit for ensuring, and I hope the states will talk about this today, ensuring that states have the best connection to research, evidence-based practice, and most importantly, the examples of what each other are doing. I should say that what CASEL's role is in the CSI is to convene and facilitate states to also provide technical assistance and consultation to make sure states are connected to research and evidence-based practice. We have so much evidence that SEL works, but what all these hundreds of studies with hundreds of thousands of students show us most importantly, I believe, as a researcher, is that we also know what works in practice, and we now have tools and resources to support it. Nobody needs to reinvent the wheel. It's out there and can be shared with states, and so the final way that CASEL supports the Collaborating States Initiative is to document the progress in states, to share the examples with states who are on a similar journey. Because I'll tell you, another question we get all the time from states is, what are other states doing? As soon as they tell you their goal, they want to know, what have other states done? I'll bring us back just real quickly to the Emerging Insights report, which I've talked about a lot of this, but I just want to come back and make the point, because I hope we'll talk about it much more today. The third bullet, the importance of state leadership, particularly in terms of integrating SEL across programs and priorities, and the next bullet, relationship of equity in this work. I expect we will have deep conversations about all of this, but I would direct you not only to our Emerging Insights report, but we also have a couple of spotlight reports that are going to be released today, and I would direct you to all of those for many, many state stories about this work. I'm going to end with this slide. This is the developmental progression that we are beginning to see as we look back over the last 2 years to understand what's been happening, and it's going to bring me to the question states are now asking. I said they started out saying, what does it look like in practice? What are other states doing? We've observed that states start with the launch phase, connecting to their stakeholders, initiating the work, developing goals, planning. They enter an intermediate phase of executing the work, completing some early goals like developing standards or guidance or professional learning. Many of our states are now beyond that phase. They've done a lot of these intermediate level things, and most of the states in the room today are at what we're, for lack of a better word, calling an advanced stage, where they're now asking the question, and this is where we are, in the next session we'll be talking about it much more deeply. They've created beautiful standards and guidance, and they're asking, how do we make it real in practice now? What do we need to do? And the answer is how to support districts, and to work with districts and partner with districts and collaborate with districts. And so this is the question that we're coming to in the work, and that I hope we'll have a lot of time to talk about with the panelists today, with the panelists in the next session and Nick's session when he'll talk much more about district-state connections. But I'm looking forward to having the chance to speak with all of you. And please participate. I'm so psyched to have all the state teams present, and they are the true experts in this work.
Good morning. My name is Rob Jagers. I am the Vice President of Research at CASEL, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. These are, so first of all, I'd like to thank Linda. She and I collaborate on the Collaborating States Initiative, and so you can tell her enthusiasm and leadership and vision for the growth of this work. So I'd just like to say publicly it's a pleasure working with you on this initiative. We have on this panel some of our state partners, and we have their bios in the packet, so I won't bother to read them to you. We will move from my left to the right. So Kay Augustine is the project director for the Federal School Climate Transformation Grant at the Iowa Department of Education. Following Kay, Kelly Allen is the manager of the Safe and Supportive Schools Bureau in the Office of Student Support Services of the New Jersey Department of Education. And finally, Beth Herman is an education consultant with the Wisconsin Department of Instruction and is a member of the Student Services Prevention and Wellness Team. So we will move from my left to my right, and each panelist will have 5 minutes. We'll try to stay on that time, and then which will leave us time for questions at the end. So please.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I am so honored to be here and so excited to meet all of you. I just want to say thank you, because the Collaborative of the States has made a huge difference in our ability at the Iowa Department of Education to be able to launch into social emotional learning. I was the sole person with the charge to do social emotional learning through our School Climate Transformation Grant, and my colleague Susan Bruce and I were trying to figure out what that looked like, and we joined the collaborative, and all of a sudden many of you in this room became my support network, and the national visibility and credibility that this has given to SEL has helped really propel the work. I am in that intermediate stage, so I'm not in the advanced stage. We have been working very hard, and I put a handout out on the table so that you could really look at probably more information that you ever wanted to know. But we have layered stakeholder groups that have been working diligently. We adopted the competencies and the definition from CASEL, and now we have been working on developing developmental indicators, and we are in the end of that process, refining those. We are so honored that we have had Nick working with us in Iowa and being that national expert, and then being able to call Linda whenever I want to has been just tremendous. I think, part of it for us is that we now are in a purposeful slowdown, and that slowdown is because of ESSA. And we're doing that very purposefully because in Iowa, we have a collaborative group called Collaboration for Iowa Kids, and it's a state entity that has the department, our regional area education agencies, and our local education agencies, and they are the ones that have a very strategic way of doing rollouts into the state, because we don't train teachers. Our regionals train teachers, so we don't want to just give them something and say, here, do it. And so we're being very, very purposeful about how we go about this process, which also slows it down. But we also want to make sure that we are aligning with what's in ESSA around SEL and behavior. And so we are taking our time to figure out, how does that look? How does that work together? In the meantime, we have a state level SEL advisory group that is meeting, and the next challenge that they have, that they're going to be talking about in October, is that we have many, many districts and regional AEAs that are moving forward. And so we don't have anything for them yet. So we send them to the District Resource Center on the website. But the other challenge we have is that we have a growing number of very zealous, assertive salespeople with shiny products that they want people to implement. We're about process, and it's very hard to get that message across. One of the things that I believe is unique to the state of Iowa, and there's information on the back of our handout about the initial focus groups that we've done, but if you know me at all, you know that if we're talking about anything that has an impact on students, we're going to have students involved. I don't believe in adults making decisions for students. We do it with them. And so we have authentically engaged youth and youth engagement, youth voice in our process, and our priority is to make that systemic. We had an awesome Safe and Supportive Schools opportunity with the Conditions for Learning survey that's now in ESSA, the students having input and the students having strategies. It didn't sustain because it wasn't part of the system. And so that's a big part of what we're doing. Another thing we're trying to do is we're really trying to help adults become what John Bridgeland calls professional listeners. We want them to learn how to truly listen to our youth, to our students, to what they believe, what they like, what they don't like, what their ideas are, where their passion is. Give them that voice. And we're doing a lot of different things around that. So in summary, the Iowa Department of Education beliefs and commitment, instead of compliance, we're about problem solving. Instead of decisions based on assumptions and perceptions, we're about data-informed decisions. Instead of train and hope, we're about strategies and sustainability of training and coaching systems. Instead of just a focus on academics, we truly are looking at reading, math, and social emotional behavior together. And instead of a focus only on the students, we're starting first with adults. And finally, instead of doing SEL to students, we want to do it with them. Thank you.
Okay. Kelly, please.
Wow, how do I follow that 5-minute perfection?
She just did the second.
I know. She was exactly 5 minutes, folks, just so you know. So, once again, I am Kelly Allen. I have to reiterate what Kay said. It is a tremendous honor to be here. Working with CASEL and other partners has been instrumental in our work, as well as to validate the work, to move the work forward, and to gain lots of momentum. I'm fortunate that in New Jersey, there is a lot of support around social emotional learning and character education. We've been leading character education for around 15 years, so we know there are a lot of great things going on in the state. We're in the advanced stage, but today I'm going to talk with you more about our process of how we got to this point, because we're really proud of the work we did in that endeavor. So, as I said, there's a lot of great work going on around social emotional learning in New Jersey, but we felt like it wasn't consistent. It was done in pockets. It wasn't evidence-based. We wanted to bring together folks from across the state and come up with a consistent language, common expectations. What does social emotional learning look like in our state for our students and our schools? So in 2014, we put together a small working group, purposely small, comprised of people from the field, so school district teachers, our school district administrators, teachers, counselors, as well as experts in social emotional learning and school climate. We have some of those in New Jersey, which is really nice. And also our professional associations. We brought those folks together and we did a lot of research. We looked at other states. We looked at Illinois. We looked at Anchorage, Alaska. And we decided, what do we think we need to have in our state? We put together a draft of competencies. We looked at and adopted the 5 from CASEL, and then sub-competencies, 3 to 5 areas for each competency. Once we did that, we decided we really wanted to make sure we were inclusive, and we put together a large stakeholder group. And I'm really proud of this work because we tried to think of who touches children. And we put together a group around 45 to 50 people. And I have to actually look at my list because it's so many to make sure I get everybody. But we thought about school district teachers and staff, counselors, school psychologists, administrators. But we thought about mental health and substance use and suicide prevention and our friends in law enforcement and juvenile justice, as well as Department of Human Services, labor, child protection services. And we brought together these people because they have all different expertise and backgrounds, and they're all influencing children and their worlds. So what can we do to work together? It was an amazing experience. I think people in the room had never met each other. There were a lot of interactions that had never taken place before, a lot of conversations that had never taken place before. We couldn't be more grateful and proud of the work people did. We pulled this group together to give feedback on that original draft of our work, and then to put them to work. And we broke them up into subcommittees, mixed up in different backgrounds, and had them develop more practical application like Linda's talking about. We developed indicators or benchmarks for each of our subcompetencies by grade band. We developed suggested activities for each grade band, for each indicator to help teachers implement this in the classroom. Because what's always guiding our work and the work of my team in my office, as well as our working group that I chaired, was, is this going to help kids? Is this going to help teachers help kids? If not, why? If not, how? So those were our mantras that we were constantly guiding our work by and looking back. Once we put this draft together, We reviewed again. We got lots of feedback, which was very unwieldy at times, and a lot of effort went into kind of trying to digest all of that and thoughtfully put it together. We did a couple reviews at the Department of Education. We were fortunate that CASEL was able to provide us support, and we did a review Linda did a review, as well as other colleagues at CASEL, to make sure we were continuing to align ourselves to the research and to evidence-based practices. We made revisions based on that. Nick and our relationship with our Mid-Atlantic Comprehensive Center helped us to establish a relationship with the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, and they did a complete cultural competency review of our work, which also was eye-opening and very helpful. So now we have these beautiful resources. We want to make sure that they don't sit on a shelf or in a binder. We want to make sure they're being implemented. We are thinking about our next steps, planning, support for it. I'm not going to go into that on this panel, but I'm happy to talk to anybody outside of it. But we felt that in order to really promote this, we need to have support from our State Board of Education. We thought the field would really buy into that. We thought that we needed them to have that leadership and that say. So we went through a process of about 6 months, working with our State Board of Education, presenting to them. It was not a slam dunk. It was not a home run, even though I thought it might be. It was wrong. They really dug into the work. They always had support for social emotional learning, but they really wanted to make sure they were being deliberate and thoughtful in our process. And they asked a lot of great questions. We had tremendous meetings outside of the board meetings with the board members. And eventually, we all came to this amazing consensus. They supported the work. And in August 5th, 2017, which happens to be Linda's birthday, I learned yesterday, our State Board of Education adopted, unanimously adopted, a resolution supporting our New Jersey social emotional learning competencies and subcompetencies and encouraging and supporting their implementation in school districts. Sure.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? I'm Beth Herman from Wisconsin, and I would concur with this panel about how excited I think we all are, I am, to be here, and the resources, the support, the access has just been amazing. The access to one another, the access to the experts. And to be honest, and I've said this before, working with CASEL gives our state agency credibility with our teachers. Because before we started doing the work at the state level, they were going ahead without us. And they found CASEL first. So it gives us legitimacy. So I guess we talked ahead of time about how we would lay out this panel, and I guess part of what I'm going to share with you is where the advanced work is going. But I just want to give you a little bit of background on where we started, just because I think one of the things you've probably noticed, and you're going to get it as we go through the day, is that everybody is convinced of their own exceptionality. But there's truth in that, right? So every one of these states, when we get together, there are so many differences by the way our states conduct business that has a huge impact on what we do on the ground level with staff. And if there's one thing, because there's a lot of national level folks here, that going into one state and getting it sort of mastered on how you're interacting isn't the same as going into another. We started this work actually with the Safe Schools Healthy Students grant from SAMHSA in 2013. And the beauty of this is that we had a stakeholder group that we had to convene for that, a state management team that had state level folks from across agencies and advocacy groups and things like that. They identified the need to have social emotional learning competencies. So the whole need to have this was not identified by me sitting at my little cube, although I will say that I cheered that on because it's been a passion of mine. But it was identified by a team, a group of stakeholders to do that. And when we began the work, we started looking around, much like all of our colleagues here from other states did, and decided that rather than look at another states, we were going to go with something local, and went with a local set of standards that we'd adopted and modified those. I thought those were going to be done fairly quickly, and it was 4 years. Truth to power, right? So we released our competencies in May with guidance in May 21st, because we had all sorts of late-minute edits. I'll never forget the date. and have now tried to figure out, and we've been doing it sort of concurrently, so it's not like, and I think everybody would concur with me here, it's not like you did one step and then went to the next step and went to the next step. It's all sort of flowing kind of together, and then things get accomplished and then you move on. So we've been looking at how we support teachers to do this. When we did the competencies, we did a lot of focus groups with staff so that we knew that these were not going to be things that weren't going to be acceptable or doable by staff. But then we've decided to look at all these different resources that we could provide, and a lot of that comes from what they tell us they need. So we've been working on how to integrate this work with other key initiatives that are occurring in our state, such as RTI and PBIS. That's probably pretty consistent across the country. Another one that's very large in our state is trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices. And so we've been working very diligently on our team and with our state PBIS team to make sure that we're messaging this in a way that helps people understand that this is not separate issues, but that these are all part of. So when I explain it to teachers, if you'll all bear with me, I think some of you in this room are old enough to remember those old anatomy books where you had the body and then you had the vellum, right, with each system of the body. That's sort of how we're looking at this, right? So PBIS is kind of the body, and then trauma and SEL, mental health, they're all those little pieces of vellum that go over the top. So we're trying to message it and make sure that staff get those connections, because it's pretty tough when you're on the front lines and more stuff gets thrown at you to see how that all fits together. We're looking at how we provide technical assistance and support through resources and alignment tools. We have a pretty nice web page once our web people got me out of the picture and cleaned it up. And one of the things that we did is we reached out, and in fact some folks are here. We reached out to published curriculum that are evidence-based and said, hey, we've got these competencies. This was really Linda's idea. And said, would you be interested in doing an alignment with your curriculum and our competencies? And so we have a number of those that did. And that's helpful to the field because they've already settled on some of these and they want to know how it fits together. And looking at how we're aligning it with other, like our technology standards. Nick is helping us with this too, looking at the integration between online safety and SEL competence. We're looking at how we can provide support to staff through technical assistance. We're looking at setting up some kinds of scheduled virtual office hours for people. We're looking at different sorts of training materials that we can get out to the field fast. In our capacity at the State Department, there's 3 of us that have part-time time to do SEL. So our capacity at the state level to do this training isn't huge. And so we're looking at how you can do the introductory pieces through online training modules that AIR and the Midwest Comp Center are helping us with, as well as some other resources that staff can use to get some competence built in their teams. We're taking the CASEL school-wide guide. If you have not seen that, where's Melissa? It's not out. Okay, so you haven't seen it yet? Okay, I felt her kick me over here. Okay, well, I've seen it. And it's an amazing resource, and we're developing training around it for schools because I don't think there's anything that you guys have missed in that. And working with school teams on how to do this work, and I'm over. So, look, I brought some materials. If you want to see them, I don't want to take them home, and please feel free to ask questions. I'm done.
So thank you all very much. You were great with time and loaded with information. So now we'd like to open it up for audience questions and discussion.
So that was brilliant, and thank you for all sharing the state of your work. So Jen and I are overseeing the policy recommendations for the National Commission, and we have a lot of state-based examples in our report to breathe life into the recommendations. But Beth, you mentioned a SAMHSA grant that seems central to Wisconsin's efforts. And I know ESSA has been fundamental, and we're also looking at the 7% of Title I resources now available to reform low-performing schools. I was just interested in the degree to which any federal support resources programs have been highly leverageable in your states, because we'd like to feature them.
So the impetus for the work in Iowa was through the School Climate Transformation Grant, and we are going into our 5th year of 5. And our partner grant is Project Aware, which is the mental health piece. And so we work as a joint core team and are really honestly continue to struggle with how do we help, like you were talking about, how do we help people understand the role of our state leadership team for PBIS, our trauma work, violence work, mental health work, and providing some documentation for how to do that. We also have several communities that received school climate grants or Project Aware grants. So those federal funds have really helped us to even be able to do the jump off to make this happen.
So we did not receive the School Climate Transformation Grant, which still haunts me to this day. But I was fortunate to be working with some really amazing people in the New Jersey Department of Education who were saying, let's get creative about it and make our own School Climate Transformation Grant. And we thought about inclusive schools and used IDA funds to put together a school climate transformation project with Rutgers University. So I oversee where we have coaches going in working on a school climate improvement process. We just released yesterday the process, the guide, the resources, and within that is a strand on social emotional learning. So we're looking to kind of continue to build that up. We put out a guide on using our ESSA funds and have been encouraging school districts using their ESSA funds to support school climate improvement and social emotional learning.
I struggle with that question because, and I'm not saying it wasn't great, because getting that money from SAMHSA was great, but federal money comes with a lot of caveats, right? And it goes away. And so as much as it was really great to get started, we've had to try to figure out at states, or if the money comes from the federal government, that these time frames on them are sort of arbitrary, right? They're going to be a 4-year funding stream or a 5-year funding stream. But where the real help is I think one of the things that the ESSA Title 4A money is so beneficial is that it's going to states, and states can use it to get it to all the districts. And it just seems like a little bit more of a sure thing. The other thing is that we have also had to, and we've done pretty well with this, I think, messaging to the state. We nested our SEL work in mental health. We have a mental health framework that was created a few years ago, and how schools can implement school mental health on a continuum. SEL is one of the universal strategies in there. And so we've been able to leverage with our legislature. I don't know how much of you know how crazy our state politics are, particularly right now. But it's got bipartisan support to address student mental health. And so we've been able to get funding from the state to support that. We just issued an RF, well, we actually awarded the grants, but we got money from our state government to do mental health services grants where districts collaborate with community mental health providers. And of the 5 large buckets where they decided to put their money in this grant, SEL was one of those top 5. So that's another way that we're getting funding sources out there. I think one of the roles, and I keep talking here, I'm sorry, one of the roles I think that states have in this is helping districts identify how to strategically use their dollars. Because they're getting funding from a lot of different sources, and you've got one group over here in the district that's planning out how to use their title funds. You've got somebody over here planning how to use their grant funds. You've got somebody over here deciding how to use their federal funds. And in some cases, they fund the same things, in some cases, they don't. So how do they have a strategic process where they think about where they can best get their money and their resources from?
Hi, Joan Duffel with Committee for Children. First, I just want to really acknowledge the amazing work you folks are doing in the States, because I think part of the work is about policy change, but actually I think the heaviest lift is actually rolling that out so that it actually gets implemented into practice. A lot of times policies change and nothing else changes behind it. So thank you for really helping connect the dots between all these big initiatives that are happening in schools and helping people see, you know, that these things are connected. And sort of on that, I have a question for Kelly in New Jersey, because I know New Jersey has been a character ed state for a long time, and I think that's kind of an artifact of federal funds from a long time ago, but it's also because Maurice Elias at Rutgers University has provided a lot of leadership and has used this term social emotional character development, and I think that's great. And I'm just wondering, because sometimes our fields think, well, it's either SEL or it's character ed, how you've helped bring those pieces together in your state in particular.
Yeah, no, great question. So Maurice is actively involved in the work. He was part of our original small stakeholder group and then also part of the larger group, and we serve together on several committees throughout the state currently. So Joan's correct. New Jersey has been a leader in the schools of character. I think the last 2 years we had the highest number of schools of character awarded, and a lot of that is based on our grassroots effort of our volunteer organizations of retired teachers and administrators and superintendents who have come together to support and coach these schools. It's our Alliance for Social Emotional Character Development. So what we've tried to do is not to isolate one versus the other, and to really talk about what does it mean to talk about teaching kids social emotional skills and what is character. And if you talk to Maurice or any of the other character advocates, they would be all about that. You know, what we don't care what score that kid got on the test. We care that that kid is, you know, a good neighbor, and that kid has relationships. And we try a lot to talk about to people how those two worlds meld together. When we're talking about social emotional learning in New Jersey, we are talking about both social emotional and character development. We do say the SECD a lot, and we try to highlight for individuals spotlights of what's going on around the schools of character and how they are embedding the social emotional skills in their efforts. So we're trying to help them to align their applications, their professional development to our competencies and subcompetencies, because once again, we want to have that same language going across, and we don't want to neglect one versus the other. Is that helpful?
May I add one thing? So in Iowa, we founded the Institute for Character Development, which was housed at Drake University. I was there for 10 years and did had a federal character education partnership grant with the Department of Ed. And it's now called the Ray Center at Drake. And we went to them and actually asked them to have a conversation internally of, do you want it, do you think this needs to be separate? Can it be the same? They came back to us and said, let's leave it social emotional learning. And so as we move forward, we're making a concerted effort. One of their associate directors led our vertical articulation group, work group. And, so we're really looking at, as we move forward, how do we articulate it? Like you're saying, how do we articulate it? Because we had over 350 schools and communities throughout Iowa that were implementing character development. And so we want to make sure that they don't see it as separate. But we also need to base it on evidence-based practices. And so, I think that's part of what we're bringing through SEL to the work, is to make sure that as they're moving forward with their character initiative, that they use solid evidence-based practices.
Hello, I'm Don Long, Director of Teaching, Leading, and Learning at the National Association of State Boards of Education, and I'm fascinated with this question about funding. And there's kind of a distinction then, if you will, maybe a dilemma that states and districts face, because a lot of the funding streams may kind of compel you to define SEL in a certain way. I've noticed all the states here are looking at it in terms of its extraordinary power in terms of a therapeutic response to children, their need, every child's need not just certain children, every child's need for physical and mental well-being. Character education. We also have the National Commission, where socio-emotional academic development is defined much more broadly and expansively as it's the way we learn. It's the way teachers teach, leaders lead. So I think that might be the great promise, is for states to have a vision of learning that's grounded in equity and research that includes socio-emotional learning, other values, where it then becomes a very powerful generative concept that then districts can interpret that meets their needs. And so along with that, if you look at it much more broadly, the funding question becomes one more of how do we integrate socio-emotional learning in our whole education system, building capacity for leaders and teachers. So then you look at Title II if you look in federal funds. You just have to be much more imaginative. Sometimes that means working with the funders. I've done that when I was at CCSSO in letting them know, yes, you think that this kind of program only meets your criteria. Let me show you how it meets this completely different kind of program. So I guess that's my, I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but I guess it's a concern about messaging. If it is kind of seen as a therapeutic response, and I apologize for using therapeutic as a quick way of defining this one strand, what about the idea that it's an empowering strand, the 5 competencies, the framework, where everyone obviously needs this, and it's just a question of making it more explicit?
And I'd like to respond because I think, you know, we've had these same conversations, and one of the things that we just finished in September was a first time ever bringing together of our state-funded instructional coaches and our teacher leaders compensation process, which has over 10,000 teachers in the state of Iowa that are participating. And we brought together the instructional coaches and the behavior coaches for the first time. We had Nick as one of the speakers. We had Fasta Lopez as another one. And then we had actually teams of instructional and behavior coaches that presented about what each other needed to know for the foundational universal practices that bring this all together. And we were planting seeds because we're not rolling out yet. So we were planting seeds. We literally gave them seeds. And we were planting seeds of start to think about this as you're doing your observations in classrooms. What are the strategies that we need to help instructional coaches understand about how they use instructional practices that have SEL embedded? And you know, and then how do the behavior coaches, how do they understand the instructional piece? And so we're working really hard at trying to figure out how we do that. And I'm not always very popular because I really think you can do this without a curriculum. So apologies to anybody that has a curriculum. But if you embed it within what you're doing, not only within the curriculum you're using, the general core curriculum, but also within how you set up your classroom and what skills are you teaching your students to be able to do what you're asking them to do, and being very purposeful about that. And so, yes, we're looking at it through the trauma lens and those lenses, but we're also looking at just solid, universal, foundational best practices.
Hello, thank you to this excellent panel. I'm Pamela McVeigh-Lally. I'm an SEL consultant. I work a bit with CASEL. So I have a question or a request, I guess, to Linda and maybe Rob. Connected to the developmental progression, can you talk a bit about the overarching theory of change that is emerging from this work around that's emerging from the state work? Thank you.
One of the slides that I cut. So now I have an excuse to go back to it. This is the... Thank you. These are the focus areas of the district theory of action at CASEL, but the CSI in the next year is really focusing on articulating a theory of action for the state work. And there's a lot of alignment we expect with these focus areas, although there are also some interesting distinctions. And by the way, another document I got to look at the policy recommendations of the National Commission, and the 4 buckets there, I think there's alignment as well with this. But in terms of building foundational support and planning, I have to say, I feel like a lot of what happens at the state level is really developing foundational support for districts, what they need. So it's interesting to think about how these go together. And much of the work in the CSI has been at the foundational level, where states are figuring out how they're going to conceptualize SEL, how they're going to communicate about it, getting leadership buy-in and so forth. But we're thinking very much too about what we're discovering about adult SEL, and not just in terms of adults being able to effectively teach SEL programs, but adult capacity in terms of, at the state level, sometimes rethinking how they connect with regional centers or districts, a different kind of adult-to-adult relationship there, a comfort with being able to see that the district may be far ahead and that the state can learn from the districts. But sometimes that's not the natural relationship that has existed previously. So we're thinking a lot about how adult leadership may transform as part of this process. And I'll say, too, I mean, I could talk about all of this. We could do a workshop all day, and I'd actually love all of your input, and many of you are going to be very engaged and involved in this process, I'll warn you. But promoting SEL for students, it's interesting for me to think about, this is where in the district theory of action you see developing learning standards. I think, Nick, you would agree, in our experience working with states, it's often a very foundational part of the work of beginning to define what do we even mean by SEL. And so it's interesting to think about the alignment, but also the unique ways that this theory of action may emerge. So anyway, I would love to continue this conversation all day. And I know you asked for Rob's input as well, so.
That's fine.
Hi, I'm Karen Bierman, Penn State. So it's very interesting to me to think about that bottom, the connection with where you all are working in creating the structures and then the programming, because I work in the research area, and a lot of the evidence-based research-based is based on programs. A lot of the funding that you can get for research is designed to validate programs. So it's very fascinating to hear the challenges that you're facing trying to align that kind of program specific on the ground with the work that you're doing. So my question is, if you could change the way research is structured, like what would be how would you create a research base that might more effectively be useful to you, that you could make more use of? And how much do you see the issue, like you mentioned, Kate, being besieged by publishers, the way it's packaged, the way it's designed? You mentioned, Beth, alignment. Like, what would it need to look like to actually be something where there's less of a gap between this research going on and then the work that you're doing?
I got all excited to answer that question. We've been working a lot with the implementation science research, and I think there's a really great place for those to interact, because while we have programs and curriculum, and in our state it's all local control, so they can decide what program they want to do, they can decide how they want to use the competencies. It's all, which makes it a little harder on our end because we're trying to support a very broad umbrella. But one of the things that the guide that I wasn't supposed to see, provides is a way to integrate some of that implementation science and those stages of implementation with the SEL content. Because a lot of our districts will buy curriculum and, the shiny box that arrives and then it sits on a shelf. Because they really don't know how to start the work and they really don't know how to move it from, they don't beta test it. They don't do the installation phase before they do implementation, for example. So I think there's a place for the research for SEL and the implementation science to come together.
I was just going to add, we are also immersed in implementation science and the process of implementation science. And I think, again, we're really trying to get them to use the exploratory phase and to look at the data that they have and to look at what their real needs are. And I can't wait for the assessment portal to be open because there's going to be some great information there on the process of thinking through what is it you really want to do and measure, and asking the local districts to think about that before they jump. And for me, I would love to see some research on the entire process and how, and I'm not a researcher, so I wouldn't know how, so you guys get to do that. But I'd like to know, how do you measure to what level it's being integrated into the existing curriculum? How do you know whether or not, besides climate change, in the school, how do you know that it's truly part of everything that's happening, which we all know that's what has to happen in order for it to be successful, but how do you know that? Go ahead.
After you.
Okay.
You go ahead.
So I was going to say, I'm really glad that I'm going after Kay and Beth on this one because I agree with what they're saying, and we're doing a lot around implementation science as well, and maybe taking this off a different tangent a little bit. One thing I like to see is how we can help influence higher education and the development of those educators before they come into the field, talking about the building the adult SEL knowledge. So right now, in New Jersey, we do interact with higher education, some of our higher education institutions, and we are thinking about different coursework that we can help them to develop and different certification tracks. So just that, I think that's an area that I would love for researchers to further explore how we can help do that in a better way and in a more of a systemic way. Because I think when they come to the school district, there's already so much that's already happened. So it would be really great to kind of influence that before they get there.
And can I just weigh in with, because you're touching on a tension point for me as a researcher of a number of evidence-based approaches, and I've helped to develop them. Our recommendation at the CSI is that ideally everyone would begin with an evidence-based program at their base. As their foundation, to get all of the schools within all of the teachers and adults within the system on the same page in terms of the language they're using, the kind of practices they're using. We also, at CASEL, as many of you know, we have some great CASEL guides, consumers' guides to evidence-based programs, and I've been a part of the team that has helped to develop those over from the beginning. So I've been a part of the team for all three of those guides. And one of the things we always look for in the guides is that the program has the capacity to support professional learning, has institutes perhaps, and that's one of the things we comment on about the programs. We know that professional learning is going to be critical to supporting evidence-based practices, so we think for a lot of reasons, ideally, evidence-based programs are great can be great as a foundation. However, having worked with a number of evidence-based approaches, I also know, and I was supporting implementation for a lot of these, as part of professional learning, we were always trying to get educators, even if it was a lesson-based approach, we were always trying to get educators to generalize beyond the lessons of the program. Evidence-based practices have to be expanded throughout the school day. So the work the state teams are doing is critically important. And I think the way we at CASEL approach it, and I know at AIR as well, that we're using what we know from evidence-based programs to identify the common practices within those programs, which can help us know what are evidence-based practices that are effective. So anyway, I just had to say that we're not moving away from evidence-based programs, but we just recognize if we truly want this to be school-wide, you've got to go far beyond an evidence-based program.
Can I add one more thing? Because you sort of gave us a wish list. The other thing that for the programmers, the folks with curriculum in here, kind of making eye contact with some of you, if you could work, we need fidelity assessments. So our staff are asking us how to assess SEL all the time, and they're going right to student skills. Right. But it's not fair to go to student skills until we know that staff are actually implementing the intervention. And what is the dosage level, for example, at which this curriculum is going to have an impact? How do you know that your staff are actually implementing it with fidelity? So we're encouraging our districts to start with fidelity assessment before they move into anything else, but we don't have any fidelity assessments to offer them. And if you're using an evidence-based curriculum, those fidelity assessments are going to be a little different. So that's my wish list. Can you all come up with some fidelity assessment? Hi, Nick.
And one thing I will add, as part of the work of the National Commission and Council of Distinguished Scientists, we're coming up with a next generation research agenda that includes the kinds of work that's being described here, shifting or having a supplemental paradigm that is much more research practitioner partnership driven as a way to get a more nuanced understanding of some of the questions that are being asked here. And that would include the various levels from state level and district level decision-making processes all the way down to impacts on students in classrooms and family engagement and community, school partnership work, et cetera, which is all part of the overall framework for systemic SEL.
And I just want to clarify one thing. When I said you don't need a curriculum, part of that is because we are a very strong PBIS state. And so, we're talking about they're teaching the skills within PBIS, and they're using curriculum within PBIS. And so going beyond that, we had someone request that we have a state curriculum for SEL. Well, we're a locally controlled state, so we're not going to have a state curriculum for SEL. But what we're trying to get them to see is what they're already doing part of this. So then how do they take what they're already doing? The other part is we want schools to have a process for selecting an evidence-based practice. And so again, coming back to, rather than jumping on this, because I have a friend in Minnesota and they know they have this and this is what we should do, have a process to have those conversations with their data, do the exploratory stage, and make very well-informed and data-informed decisions about what evidence-based practices they want to implement.
So this is Mark Greenberg from Penn State, and we're all interested in systems-wide change. That's what this is about. It's about creating healthy, caring schools for adults and for children, and there's a lot of components we've discussed. One of the most important components that's never discussed or rarely discussed is the role of the administrators, especially the principals, because we know that what principals do in their buildings is critical to if this will really create a systems-wide change. So I'm interested in your states. We know education is a chaotic process. How much have you been able to connect with your state administrators association, your superintendents association, labor unions, et cetera, to really bring that part of the process in? Because otherwise, what I usually see is that principals and administrators are the last ones on the list.
I couldn't agree with you more. The school leadership and district leadership is critical. From the beginning, we always thought it was essential that the heads of all of our associations, so our Principals and Supervisors Association, our Association of School Administrators, our Teachers Union, were all part of the conversation and the work. So we definitely have kept them a part of it the entire time, it helps that all of them believe in it as well. So they are helping to spread that mission and continue that work. Today, when I'm here, back in New Jersey, they're hosting together a whole child conference with with ASCD. So there's a lot of support around it from that perspective. We just recently launched a New Jersey Principal Learning Network. So where we are kind of putting together a community of practice among principals across the state, so they can kind of network, learn from each other, and myself, I'm providing the social emotional learning piece to those different sessions. Other people at the Department of Education and other groups are bringing other different perspectives, so we're kind of all talking the same language. They know what's available. We're helping to make sure that they are aware of how this can help support their schools and communities. With that school climate work I was talking about earlier, we require the principal to be a member of the team. So that leadership support we think is critical. Now, one thing we know, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows and experiences, when leadership changes, when a principal leaves the school, our biggest fear is that that program or that SEL or those practices are going to go away. And we see that. And right now we're trying to develop some strategies and tools, and we're actually doing an evaluation right now to figure out how can we help to deal with those circumstances, because we are seeing that when we have a principal that's a strong, committed leader and the work is being done and that principal gets sent to another school because he or she did such an amazing job at that school or left for other reasons, right, the efforts start to lessen. So we actually are working right now to develop ways to help combat that. So that's to be released soon, and hopefully we figure out this amazing piece to the puzzle, because that is such a challenge for our schools. We're definitely trying to keep leaders in mind, and we're always encouraging their participation in all of our work around social emotional learning and school climate.
And could I just make a plug for the district work on this, because to sustain, when you talk about leadership change, that's why to me it is so important that it be a district-wide initiative, because that's where it becomes possible to sustain the work through those kinds of leadership changes.
Yeah, and we're talking about too, thinking about our coaching support we're providing. Mm-hmm. Do we need different dosage levels? Do we need different type of scaffolding when we have those leadership changes? That's one thing we're exploring right now.
Okay.
Hi, Nova Bureau with the Social Emotional Learning Alliance for the United States. I'm here with my colleague Jim Vetter, and on behalf of our colleague Maurice Elias, who I think is at the ASCD conference in New Jersey. I wanted to ask about grassroots efforts. So we're working to support many states, growing number of states, to build capacity for, plans for organizing grassroots efforts for promoting and supporting equity-focused, evidence-based, high-quality social-emotional learning. And Kelly, you spoke to this very briefly, but I'm wondering if you and others could expand on what you would like to see from those grassroots efforts, how they can best complement the work that you're doing in your states, partner with you if that's applicable. So love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start since you just mentioned that group. So we are all about the grassroots support for social emotional learning, and think that that is a way to promote sustainability in different communities that best fits the needs of those schools and those students. So we're definitely really supportive of that. I know that as far as a lot of parents have been working together around the grassroots efforts, particularly in New Jersey. I know the SEL for US is thinking about a New Jersey, I don't know what they're calling, I guess. Affiliate, okay, good word. A New Jersey affiliate. And since there are some groups that already exist that are doing grassroots work around school climate, healthy schools, and social emotional learning, thinking about let's not reinvent the wheel, but let's pull together and say, do we want to look at our mission and reframe it to kind of help fit how we do that? From the Department of Education perspective, we absolutely want to hear from the field. We want to hear from parents. We want to hear from people that are advocating for what they think is best for kids. So we want to be a part of that conversation and provide whatever support that we can, or at least give the proper avenue or venue to have the conversation and make sure those ideas are heard from other people.
So I think in Wisconsin, one of the places that this would really be beneficial is at the local level. because our state is so different that the way that grassroots might operate in one of the wealthier suburbs outside of Milwaukee County might be very, very different than a grassroots organization in a small rural district in northern Wisconsin. And I think it's also probably better targeted at the local level because we aren't in Wisconsin. You guys are people are talking about policy and things like that. We don't do a lot of policy change at the state because it is such a local control state that I think the policy development is going to be more local. So when we've had state federal grants and we're looking at doing policy development, for example, it's helping districts write policy on transgender bathrooms or helping those policies come from the local level because it is so much control nested there. So, but I do think having some connections. We had this conversation a little bit last night. Our state, I think Kelly said the same thing. We cannot advocate as state employees. We can't do anything that looks like we're doing lobbying of any kind. So while I as a state person, I'd like to know what's going on and have some connection, I think the local folks would have a better chance of making some impact than at the state level.
I just want to add the impact of before and after school programming as well, and making sure that's one of the things we're doing is making sure that our out of school time folks are part of this process, as well as the nonprofit organizations and agencies that are out working and youth serving organizations. I agree with Beth. I think we're a local control state. And if there were materials to actually help districts be able to bring together community district organizations and help them put that together. I was in Minnesota for 7 years. They're a very strong community education state, and community education, that's at the core, is to bring those groups together to have conversations about the needs of the community. But I'm finding a lot of folks don't know how to do that. And so even providing those resources would be great.
I think we're at time, so thank you all very much. Certainly thank you to all the panelists and Linda as our keynote. Looking forward to continued conversations throughout the day. Thank you all very much.